Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host, and today we've got a very interesting guest with Carey. Now, Casey, doesn't define you, but you're a three-time B2B CMO. You've kind of been around for a little while, and part of what we're going to talk about is we're going to take some things today that we think about a lot, but we're going to look at them in ways through lenses that we don't always look at them. And we're going to focus on how do we get on that day one list. And just to kind of underscore that, the research that's out there is that 4 out of 5 on average vendors get on the day one list, day one, right? And 95% of the time you buy from that list. And most often you buy from the guys that are number 1 and 2, the vendors that are 1 and 2 on that list. So if you're not on that list on day one, you're out of the game.
Yeah,
right?
That's very true.
So it takes a lot to then plan for and make sure that we're part of that day one list. So we're going to kind of break all that down. I would love to know, though, a little bit more about your background. You were part of the Peacekeeper Missile program. I want to hear a little bit about that. You're an avid beach volleyball player. I'd love to hear just a little bit about you and your life, and then we'll get into the podcast.
Sure, absolutely. My undergrad was actually in electrical engineering. So came out of college writing software and designing hardware, and went to work for a DoD defense subprime contractor. And one of the projects I had the pleasure of working on was Peacekeeper Missile, the flight computer for the Peacekeeper Missile. Probably dating myself a little bit because we're not around anymore, but it was a big program under the Reagan administration, kind of tipped the balance of power, has been replaced since then by the submarine-based missile systems. But the whole idea behind the Peacekeeper was a mobile launch vehicle that was hard to target. So that was a very interesting project. Obviously, some moral questions you have to ask yourself when you're working on something like that. But yeah, that's different than my day-to-day for sure.
I've got a son right now that's in school in engineering, and he's hoping to get a job with Lockheed Martin. So he's been asked all those kind of like same questions, moral questions and everything. He goes, I'm not worried about, we got to have the programs. It's the people that we put them in our hands to. They're the ones that got to worry about the morality of that. I thought that was a good answer.
It was a great answer. I'm not the one pushing the button at the end of the day. Yeah, I'm an avid volleyball player for many years now, beach volleyball specifically. It started indoor, but then kind of transitioned to beach. I've built a great community across the world of fellow volleyball players. I can kind of drop into any city and find a game. It's awesome. But one of my most proudest moments in beach volleyball is I took down a 2-time gold medalist, indoor gold medalist playing outdoors. But let's just say he was not happy about losing to someone like me.
And now you get to tell it on podcasts and things like that. Here's what I'd love to do. There's a new reality for the buyers that we're trying to influence. And you talked about how that they feel more empowered than ever before. It's kind of like, who has the cards, right? It's a lot in the news these days, right? So tell me a little bit about the empowered buyer reality as you see it and what we should be thinking about and doing as B2B vendors.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting if you think about, I'm old from day one when the World Wide Web happened. People started talking about empowered buyers. When we put up that B2B website, oh my God, the buyers are empowered now. And so it's been happening for a long time. AI has accelerated it even more so, right? Like 5 years ago, they had Google. That was kind of their primary way to find information and use third-party information and all that stuff. Now AI has made that much simpler. I think your opening is spot on. And so it really forces us to think differently about the buyer journey. Day one, they most likely have a short list. Research will say that list is 3 to 4 vendors. They will also tell you there's a preferred vendor. I think it's interesting if you think about it like F1 racing. And I'm not an expert on F1 racing, but it's a pretty cool sport. There's qualifying. There's 22 cars who go race and determine their position on the start the next day. The difference for us is there's not 22 cars in the race on the next day. There's 3 or 4. So it's really that day one list is the qualifying race. Like the decision may be made without you. And then to your point earlier, the pole position is premium. Some stats, I think it's 68% of buyers have a day one list that have 3 or 4 vendors on it. 80% of the time, the preferred vendor wins the deal. So quick math, half the time, the preferred vendor wins the deal. To the point you made earlier, if you're not on that day one list, your chances of winning are single digit percentage. So at the end of the day, the new game is the day one list for sure.
Here's where I think the gap and the opportunity really starts to open up. I would love to get your point of view on this. Getting on the day one list means you got to be known and trusted before the day one list is formed, right? And you have to do it in an environment where they don't want to talk to you, where they're waiting longer and longer to want to talk to the selling organization. And they're doing more and more of their research without us. And one of the biggest behind that, you and I were just talking about the most recent trust barometer by Edelman said that 32,000 respondents worldwide, 68% of them think that guys like you and me are being intentionally misleading as business leaders. That's an unbelievable stat. And it's been consistent for years. It's been actually growing in years. Trust has been on a downslide for decades all over the world, Europe, especially in the US. So it's not something that we can just disregard. And I had a CRO on and he said, Steve, I'm not talking to them. You're out in front of an RFP or that day one, then I'm out of the game. Here's the question I have for you. That's a lot of work before they're bank qualified, right? They've allocated budget, they made a decision, they've established budget, they've allocated it, they're on a timeline, they're searching. That we have just established bank qualifications means we're too late if we're not on there. We got to spend a lot of time and effort with our ABM list. We can't necessarily rely just on the sales team because they're qualifying based on attainment of short-term quota. How do we organize ourselves in order to get on that day one list, have the right resources to reach out, create that trust in advance? Because it's not happening with a lot of companies.
No, and a lot of companies have been either unable or unwilling to make those investments, right? Because the focus has been on 3-month pipeline, clear ROI on media spend. We've been praying at the altar of demand of performance for a long time. We've kind of avoided all this stuff before that. That's really the point. Like, you can't do it anymore. You can't not avoid making those investments, really thinking about it in those terms. Like your comment around the trust barometer, like that's a gut punch metric for me personally. We've done it to ourselves. There's plenty of marketing out there that is hyperbole. It's driven often by VC funding. If my team ever puts something in front of me where we're leading the next gen, the best ever, like whatever, I'm like, no, cut out, right? Those are BS words. Nobody believes it. I think like getting to the core of your question, I mean, there's a lot of levers we can turn that help us get on that day one list. It's hard to say the word in B2B. Part of it's brand. It's awareness and it's perception and it's preference. You have to invest in those, in creating those things. And a lot of people refer to it as mental availability. I know I have 3 or 4 vendors that I'm not ready to buy in that space yet. But when I'm ready to do something, I already know who I'm going to talk to because of the experience that I've had over the last couple of years, either people I've talked to, what I see on social media, what I've seen at events, talking to my peers, like whatever it is, I've already formed an opinion about those vendors. I have no need right now whatsoever. But at some point when I do have that need, I know where I'm going. All those things that we have invested in to kind of create that perception, create that awareness, ultimately it's going to pay off for them at some point in the future. And it's a big leap of faith.
So here's the thing. There's marketing typically, and I talk to a lot of CMOs that feel like they don't have a seat at the table, imposter syndrome, feel like they're as good as their last lead, feel like they're looked upon as the biggest cost center, one of the biggest cost centers in the business with paid media and everything. What you're talking about here is really stepping up. And we all have been trained, we have to be more revenue focused. If we don't even say those words, we're already 10 years behind the game. We know we need to be more pipeline, more revenue focused. We need to be building relationships earlier. We know the sales team isn't going to do that. They're going to play their role. But how do we get involved earlier? How do we add additional value to the equation? And you had talked about understanding the customer, a deep understanding of the customer. And you did it. And so eloquently, you did it in a way, because we all go, yeah, duh, we got to do that. Right? We got to provide value. We got to build trust. We got to know the customer. They can be just words that we say, and then they just kind of wash away because we just heard them so much. But here's the underpinning behind what you were saying. Because I want to put what you're about ready to say in framework. It was Forrester in 2024 came out with a customer obsession study. And they found that less than 3% of B2B companies were truly customer obsessed. Less than 3%. Yet there's 100% of us that would say, yeah, we're customer obsessed. We're customer first. Of course we are, right? When you're talking about the voice of the customer, that puts it in perspective. There is a massive opportunity. There is a massive competitive advantage to be had, to be seen as a customer obsessed organization and use that as a competitive advantage for us. What does it mean to you to be customer obsessed? Understand the voice of the customer.
It's a great question. And one of the things I always talk to my team about is our number one job is to be experts on the market, to understand who buys, what problems they have, why they buy, both what's the benefits to the company and to them personally, what are their hopes and dreams and challenges, and then ultimately communicate them in a way that resonates and tells them we're the best choice to help move them forward. Like really starting with that audience and understanding them and talking to them in their language. For us, like a big focus is verticalization, that part of being relevant and part of resonating and having that emotive connection is I'm using your words. Like our story matches your story, investing the time and effort in being able to do that. We see when we do that, more pipeline and higher win rates than if we just kind of had generic kind of problem solution stuff. It's hard to do. AI makes it much, much easier now to do at scale. It makes a huge difference if you can accomplish that. The thing that's interesting about it, I'll just add this, tends to be a reductive exercise. When the day you say, I need to stop being everything to everybody, and I need to be very specific things to a few people, it changes everything.
And then all of a sudden, you're not trying to carry that heavy weight across an entire TAM. And that's the goal of ABM anyways. It's like this is the sweet spot. This is where we're going after. Something you just said there about that AI really helps a lot on this. But you've got to be AI is like a lot of other tools in that if it's garbage in, it's garbage out. Right now, everybody has, if you just put in your ICP, the persona and everything, it's going to spit out, it's going to look and it's going to say, okay, I would reword it this way. Everybody has that. So all your competitors have that as well. What they don't have is if you dedicate to understanding the customer, then you're dedicating really in this day and age, you're dedicating time with them. You're dedicating asking questions and you're dedicating listening. If you can take that, I had this brilliant conversation with a CEO. Gentleman was for 17 years at Accenture. And he said, Steve, there's structured and there's unstructured data you want inside of AI. He said, structured, that's the CRM, Excel sheets, that's your output from your NPS survey, all the structured data. The rest of it is all the unstructured data, right? Gong recordings, unstructured data. Podcast recordings like this, unstructured data. And that unstructured data is very underrepresented because we tend to feel like we got more data coming out our ears we ever had before. Right? But if you're going to do the kind of things that you said that have impact on the pipeline and revenue about speaking in the voice of the customer so that they feel like you actually get it, that means you understand them, not just the right choices of words, but you're understanding the right elements. I'm just seeing, am I taking this away correctly? That like what you're saying?
I think if you take it to its end state, you think about this idea of a synthetic persona. And we've tested this where we went out and found buyers, either existing customers or customers of our competitors or potential buyers, looked in their LinkedIn profiles, basically said, access all public information about these people, bring in the Gong conversations, bring in all the data that we have and basically create this idea of the synthetic persona. It's basically a live focus group. So now I can test messaging, I can test ads, I can do a lot of stuff with that. But if it's deep, what are the trigger events? What words should you avoid? What words should you use? All the psychographic stuff, like once you have that, which was almost impossible to do 5 years ago, now it's like things like survey panels and focus groups and stuff become obsolete because you've got much better real-time dynamic data that serves that purpose for you.
Yeah. And I guess in the end, the way I think about it, like what you're saying is it allows us to speak like an insider.
Yeah. I love that. I love that.
And, Gartner, Forrester, they would always say, ultimately, we've got to, as a selling organization, play the role as a trusted advisor. I would say we have the ability today to be seen more as peers, as colleagues. If we're in the middle of the conversation that's happening and we come across as somebody that's so in the know that we feel like an insider, not a bad goal to have when the peer is who they trust. Why wouldn't that be our goal, right? To be perceived more. And we hire in all of our organizations, we hire peers like we should be able to. I'm just kind of extrapolating what you're saying here, because if we just say, yes, we have to understand the voice of the customer, we're leaving so much on the table. We've got to be so much more determined about that, all the way down to the execution on it.
Yes, I totally agree. And then the next piece is that execution, right? Like, how do you establish that you actually understand them at that level, right? It's working, mapping content to the buying journey. What questions do they have? What problems or challenges are they trying to solve? Like, how do you help take them down that journey in a way that, to your point, you understand them, you're an insider. It's like basically look at it, go, yeah, that's me. Okay. I'm in. Tell me more. If we can achieve that, then that's when the magic like really happens. Because ultimately, when you get to the end, they're like, oh my God, they were so helpful. They understand me. They're super valuable. They're great solutions. People talk well about them. Oh, they're on the list and they may actually be in the pole position.
So here's what's interesting too, is I'm thinking about this and like the uses of AI. So there's a thing that nobody talks about, which is insight decay. The last time you went into like a cab meeting, come out of a customer advisory board meeting, and we're all doing high fives and belly bumps because we're like, oh, we got to do this more often. And you're thinking about like, oh my God, the things that I just learned there, right? And you go and you tell your team, makes it maybe into the sales team meeting, it makes it into 2 points on a PowerPoint deck somewhere. You talk about it maybe at the next board meeting, and all of a sudden you're all excited. And a month later, maybe you remember it, right? 3 months later, nobody remembers it. 6 months later, the CRO is not working at the company anymore. He's not remembering it. 12 months later, half the sales staff is different and the marketing staff is different. It's like AI has the ability to take all this unstructured data and never forget it and utilize it and democratize it so that literally any team member that comes in at any point in time has access to it. And it's overseeing what they're doing and it's producing things automatically that doesn't forget, doesn't let anything decay like that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point, right? I think as humans, we overvalue recency. I see it happen all the time. So and so said something on a call with a customer. It is like the new thing. There's no notion of frequency. Like, how often is that said? Because one data point now is like best thing ever. I think your point's right about AI can help rationalize that and maybe offset some of our own kind of unconscious biases when we do things like that. Because the question would be like, that's awesome. How many other customers is that important to? We are talking about it and how is that strategically important to us? Really kind of analyzing that whole thing to say, okay, yeah, this is a winning idea. Let's go.
Yep. And maybe that was a phenomenal idea, but it was said twice in the last 6 months where these things were mentioned like 8 times in the last 6 months. I was talking to a gentleman. He was a chief strategy officer. He's a chief growth officer. He was chief commercial officer. And he said, we tend to stop at the shiny object, the thing that we think's the most important. And then we don't go any farther. And we're like, oh, we dive in and we got solutions for that. And he said, but there's really every pain point, every challenge has 4 or 5 surrounding elements to that we need to be digging in and we need to be understanding. What this does is what you're talking about here is using AI to not forget that, to not just focus on the one most recent thing, the shiny object, but in the end, what are the things that are the most important that we've got to take care of? Whether we're designing an onboarding for a new client, we're designing a demand gen campaign, we're designing the next sales proposal. How does it meet? How does it live up to them? How does it talk to them like an insider? And how does we make sure it covers the points that we know it really needs to? Not just the ones that we assume because they line up with our product roadmap the best, right?
Yeah. I think like the real important thing is there, AI helps us make that happen. Because in the past, it would be me giving sales some materials. They may or may not use it. Ultimately, that kind of the consistency and quality decays as it goes away from whoever initially owned it, right? Whether it's marketing or somebody else. Now, if we apply AI kind of at the end, at the delivery point, and say, like, here's all the context and reference material, make sure it's represented. Like now we can have much higher quality, much more consistency on those communications, whether it's emails, proposals, demos, like whatever it is where we're having those engagement points, we can bring that knowledge to bear as part of that.
So I want to ask you something about this. You and I first talked, we were talking about what do we want to talk about? And I asked you a question. I said, what are the two greatest challenges you see to creating long-term sustainable growth? I've asked that about for over now just about the last 100 guests, just over the last 100 guests. And the number one challenge that came up was internal alignment. The number one challenge to creating long-term sustainable growth. The second one was what you're talking about right now, lack of deep understanding of the voice of the customer. Third was trust, internal and external. What was interesting is throughout the entire top 10, they were all internally focused. So the answer was 100% internally, or step one was an internal solution that then went external. What it said is we're our own biggest problems. We are our own biggest challenges. So I was talking to this woman, CMO. She's now a consultant at a company that just does go-to-market strategies with mid-market B2B companies. And she said over 70% of the time, it's all about internal alignment. They're saying it's this, they're saying it's the quota system, they're saying it's the competitor just launched something, they're saying. And she said that the voice of the customer was the number one force for change management and internal alignment inside of the organization. In other words, nobody argues with the voice of the customer. So here's my question. Who's in charge? Who owns the voice of the customer?
And that's a hard question, but I think it makes sense, right? If you think about startups, they always seem to do a really good job of representing their buyer. They understand them. Usually they came out of that space. They know how to talk to them. They're super aligned and it works great. You get to be a $150 million company. You got multiple segments, multiple personas, multiple products, and like all of that gets diluted and lost. You now no longer kind of have that close connection to the customer and how do you bring it in? It's a great question. I think ultimately CMO and the marketing team, like we have to force alignment. That's probably like our job one, right? I see way too many marketing teams are off doing their own thing, and that's the career limiting growth at some point. I think we talked about this, right? It starts with the ICP and the TAM and who you're selling to and what problems you solve and product market fit and making sure there's alignment on that. And like there's still experiences every day where somebody's like, oh, I need a bunch of materials for manufacturing. And I'm like, that's not on the list. That means there's no decks, there's no case studies, there's no shows, there's no ad campaign. There's like, sorry, like, I don't know who
We'll just gin that up. We'll ask AI. We'll just create a whole bunch of stuff for you. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It becomes in some ways like a master class of saying no, but it's like literally like I have the air cover conceptually because we're aligned. And then I got to go back, make sure we're still aligned at the highest levels and kind of let the chips fall where they may. The thing I think we talked about, which is interesting, sales teams hate productive exercises. We have a short list of ICPs. We have a short list of personas. We have right to win markets. And we're going to go deep there and win as much as possible. Hate that. They want the aperture to be as big as possible. I think it was Jeffrey Moore, Crossing the Chasm, who talked a lot about the number one way companies fail is trying to be all things to everybody and refusing to focus. He talks a lot about the bowling pin analogy and all that stuff, but it's like, yes, the more focus you have, the more you win, which gives you permission to open the aperture a little bit more and go after more. But you got to go through that process. And I think for a lot of companies, it's hard. I think ultimately it's a leadership problem. It's a leadership challenge.
You know, it's interesting for years, the Gartners, the Forresters of the world have been saying CMOs, you got to play the role of the chief customer officer, right? You got to be the voice of the customer because nobody else is picking up that mantle, right? And then you head back to, and I always think back to all the CMOs I'm talking to that don't feel like they have a seat at the table. right? That feel like they're as good as their last lead. I'm like, well, your seat at the table is representing the customer. You represent the highest voice of authority in the business. You should be the most important seat at that table in the executive room, right? And so it just changes the mentality of how we look at this. But then it also, what it means is we got to be very intentional about not just looking at surveys, not just listening to gong conversations. Inside of a gong conversation, somebody's being pitched. Somebody's got their cards against their chest and they're going like this and they're wondering what they can learn from you. They're not there to open up. It's not that that can't happen. Things can happen in sales conversations, but you would never say, I'm going to run a voice of the customer program through a commercial sales operation. You'd laugh at yourself and say, well, worst idea, but we rely on it, right? We're like that sometimes is some of the biggest ways we get feedback on the voice of the customer. What you really brought light to here today is that we can't give lip service to this. If we're going to get on the day one list, we got to be early. We got to be trusted, which means we got to be seen as a peer. We got to be seen as an insider. We got to do the things to do that. We got to put the effort and the time to do that.
Yeah, and you can't do it if you don't understand the market. You don't understand your customers. That's what's required. I'll share a hack with everyone. This really worked for me. So whether it's in a QBR, a board presentation, any sort of kind of high stage presentation, I always have an executive summary slide before I dive into the details. I always share at least one customer insight in the executive summary, something that no one else knows. We do that very intentionally. And I think it ultimately just sets up the credibility for everything else you have to say.
Yeah. You're like, what else does Casey know? You know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's hard. It takes some work, but it's a good forcing function to make sure you make that important.
So we've covered like a ton of territory here. If there was one thing out of all of this that we've talked about, the one most important thing you want the other C-suite executives that are going to be consuming this podcast to take away from the conversation, what would you want that to be?
I would say, so it's interesting. I've been talking about and using kind of different terms. I think I started talking about pre-purchase preference like 4 or 5 years ago. And I used it as a way to not talk about brand, but talk about adding strategies beyond demand capture. Why is this important? And it's been interesting to see the evolution. John Miller, Sidney Sloan at the Forrester Summit, people are starting to talk now about preference marketing. The whole idea of creating preference, pre-purchase preference. And so I think it's really starting to catch on as a concept within B2B marketing. So I would recommend and highly encourage everyone to think about what that means to you. And it means it's different things for different people. There's probably 4 or 5 levers that you can pull and really start to invest in and make important to create that. You also have to understand the metrics that represent that success. Unfortunately, nobody's going to tell us where we ranked on day one. We're not going to know, right? I would love if our sales team would ask that question. They'll probably not get a true answer, but still,
No.
the board go, yeah, we're ranked 2.4 on average in every deal we're in, but we're not going to.
That would be phenomenal to know that, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. But, I think the easy one is like, it's just getting more bats. If you're doing that work, you will get more bats because you're on more lists. And then you can start looking at win rates and like all the things should flow from there, right? So really it's a way to grow your pipeline and increase the efficiency of all the stuff you do to ultimately drive the outcomes.
Yeah. I love it. That's my big takeaway. Focus on preference marketing because that kind of summarizes it all at once. I love that actually. The mission of the podcast here is to take everybody's perspectives, like all C-suite executives from all over the C-suite, all over the world, all B2B. And what have we learned? What are we doing different? We all know that the game's changing underneath our feet, like as we speak, like we're on quicksand, kind of trying to figure this out, right? And so if we can just keep in touch with each other and learn how we're all thinking about managing in this new world, then it's like the rising tide that lifts all boats. And this was a great conversation. You were an amazing part of that rising tide today. And I just wanted to say thank you for coming on to the podcast.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. It's been a pleasure.